This video is sponsored by War Thunder. A few months ago I started something absolutely ridiculous. I set out on a quest to take down every enemy in Diablo 2 in one single hit. And I don't mean just random imps and zombies, I mean all elites and even all of the act bosses who have thousands and thousands of life. Can you beat Diablo 2 with only one-shots? So what counts as a one-shot anyway? Well, there are no official rules, and as far as I know, no one had really attempted this before, at least not what I could find. So I made up my own criteria. A one-shot is killing an enemy in one hit, and I let the word hit be my guiding principle. To me, a skill like Seal did not count as a one-shot, even though you only press the attack button once, because that is clearly multiple hits. But a skill like Poison Dagger on the other hand did count as a one-shot, because there was only one hit, even if the enemy would die from the secondary poison damage of the attack. The most important decision for this challenge by far was to pick my class. I had done a little bit of research before starting this, and in my mind there was only one option. The assassin was perfectly on theme with taking out enemies in one quick hit, but I also thought that she had the best combination of skills for attempting something like this, and I'll explain why as we get deeper into the challenge. Right off the bat I faced my first problem. With my starting gear and no skills at level 1, I only dealt 5 to 9 damage per attack. That was enough to be guaranteed to one-shot Fallen in the Bloodmoor, but against zombies in the area I only had a chance to do so depending on my damage roll and the zombie's life roll. But it was not guaranteed, so this challenge had problems to solve from the very first area of the game. When I failed to one-shot an enemy, I would immediately save and exit the game and start a new one, respawning all enemies and putting me back in town. My strategy for level 1 was to simply ignore all zombies and kill Fallen and Quill Rats for experience until I hit level 2. With my first level up I unlocked a crucial part of my plan, the martial arts skill Tiger Strike. This skill charges up your physical attacks with some very big damage boosts, and then you can release the attack with either your basic attack or one of the assassin's finisher moves. Boosting my attack damage by 300% at level 2 was of course a big deal and allowed me to take down tankier enemies like zombies with ease. Though Tiger Strike had a pretty significant downside. To get the 300% damage boost to take down a tanky enemy, I first had to one-shot 3 weaker ones with Tiger Strike itself, and Tiger Strike has no bonus damage whatsoever when used to charge up. That was no problem in the Den of Evil since there were plenty of low-level Fallen, but I could technically run out of weak enemies to charge up on, so I had to be mindful of this and plan ahead for difficult encounters, like Corpsefire, the first miniboss and the only elite in the Den of Evil. Being both a zombie and an elite monster, Corpsefire was far tankier than any other enemy I had fought so far. Before I even attempted to attack Corpsefire, I grabbed a new weapon, a Scepter, higher base damage and a 50% bonus damage to undead enemies. I was livestreaming this challenge and right from the start people were doubting me. But this challenge is pretty much impossible, you can't one-shot bosses. Well, we'll see. Maybe it is impossible, but it is, to me, a very fun problem to try and solve. I don't know why I am this way, but nothing motivates me more than a seemingly impossible challenge. I socketed the scepter with a chipped topaz I had found to add another 1 to 8 lightning damage, though it's important to note that elemental damage is actually not boosted by Tiger Strike, only physical damage is, so the lightning damage wasn't that big of a deal, but of course I wanted to maximize my damage any way I could. To ensure the best chances of one-hit kills, I had to be fully charged for every minion and then Corpsefire himself. By now I did not have enough Fallen left for each of the zombies, but I figured out a neat little trick. By one-shotting a Fallen and then waiting for a nearby shaman to revive it again, I had an infinite supply of trash mobs to charge up on. I took all of Corpsefire's minions down one by one, bouncing back and forth between the Fallen factory and the zombies. Then I walked up to Corpsefire and stared him dead in his dead eyes, and he fell in one swift bonk to the head. A decisive victory over the first obstacle, but a baby step in the grand scheme of things, the first elite of many to come. I beat the Den of Evil at level 4 and already I put some of my stat points into Vitality, and that was a big mistake. I did have to stay alive long enough to run up to monsters and one-shot them, but Vitality did nothing for my damage, so I really couldn't afford to waste stat points like that. With the strategy of using Tiger Strike on small enemies and taking bigger ones down with a super strong Scepter swing, I moved on through Act 1. Though I did take my time to power up a bit in every area that I entered, to make sure that I kept scaling my damage up to match the stronger and stronger enemies that I encountered. I slowly upgraded my gear as I went, but for now most of it didn't really matter apart from my weapon. I made myself a trident with 3 chipped emeralds in it, 9 to 15 base damage on hit and then 30 poison damage over time. And this gave me really solid minimum damage to ensure that my hits with Tiger Strike kept one-shotting enemies as I progressed. Most of my preparation for taking on the first act boss was done in the Forgotten Tower, farming the Countess. She drops a lot of runes, and runes were another crucial component in my plan to one-shot all of Act 1. It wasn't all that easy with low survivability and no crowd control, and missing attacks was so punishing with my slow attack speed. But my wish list of runes was quite long, so farming the Countess was a no-brainer. After a while I had secured a nice stash of runes, including several Tal runes. Not a very rare rune, but being able to reliably get a bunch in the first act was crucial, because when socketed into a weapon, each Tal adds 75 poison damage over 5 seconds, and for the beginning of the game, 75 damage is a lot. I did some additional level farming in the inner cloister and the cathedral. Well, I say some farming, but I was spending hours grinding here. But that's the beauty of editing, you don't have to watch me attack the same monster over and over and over. At this time I put a skill point into Cloak of Shadows to blind enemies around me for some much needed crowd control. But that was another mistake in thinking that I could afford to spare a few skill points for utility and safety, when in reality I needed to go all in on damage. During this grind I also made myself another important weapon, the runeword Malice in a broadaxe. Solid base damage, some stats to help me hit my enemies easier, and 100% chance to cause open wounds. Diablo 2's version of bleed. Open wounds is basically the physical version of poison, it deals damage over time. Unfortunately, you can't really tell how much damage it does by any information in-game, but it is pretty good and it also scales with your character's level, which will become important later. I leveled up all the way to level 17 here, and then I bought another trident with 3 open sockets and put 3 Tal runes into it for an astonishing 226 added poison damage over 5 seconds, in addition to the 9 to 5 physical damage on hit. Don't question how 3 times 75 becomes 226 instead of 225, it's just Diablo math. Though as I mentioned, Tiger Strike does not multiply elemental damage, so this wasn't as crazy as it first might seem. But this trident would take care of any normal enemy for the rest of the first act, and for everything else, a charged up attack with my Malice axe was enough. This was all well and good, but let's talk a little bit about the main obstacles for this challenge, the act bosses. While there were some tanky monster types and elites that required some amount of preparation and planning to one-shot, they were nothing compared to the act bosses. My first major target, Andariel, the final boss of Act 1, has 1024 life. Reaching 1000 damage in Act 1 is not reasonable at all, but I had a plan. Andariel is 50 lightning and cold resistance, as well as a whopping 80 poison resistance, which didn't rhyme well at all with my current loadout relying so heavily on poison damage. But she has a bit of a unique trait when it comes to fire. Andariel has minus 50 fire resistance, which translates to fire damage dealing 50% extra damage to her, and this was a weakness that I intended on exploiting. But first I needed one more level. Taking enemies down in one shot just felt so good. Honestly, it never got old. And this feeling isn't unique to Diablo 2. One-shotting your enemies also feels great in this video sponsor, War Thunder. War Thunder is the most comprehensive vehicle combat game ever made, available now for free on PC, consoles and mobile. Choose from thousands of different tanks, planes, helicopters and ships, both modern and historical, from 10 different nations, and deploy them in grand-scale PvP battles together with over 95 million players worldwide. Crucial mechanical components as well as the crew can be individually damaged or disabled by enemy fire. Add to that different types of armor and ammo, as well as realistic graphics and sound effects, and you can really immerse yourself in War Machine warfare. My favorite thing in this game by far is the X-ray vision kill cam, showing you exactly where the shot landed and what led to the destruction of the vehicle. Play War Thunder now for free on PC, PlayStation, Xbox or mobile, using the links in the video description or the pinned comment. If you sign up for a new account or haven't played the game in 6 months, you'll also get a big bonus for free, including premium vehicles, in-game currency, a week of premium account and more. The bonus is available on PC and consoles, but only for a limited time, so don't miss out. Thanks to War Thunder for sponsoring, and now back to the video. It's time to introduce the final part of my plan to one-shot Andariel. At level 18 I unlocked a new martial art skill, Dragon Tail. Dragon Tail is a kick which deals fire damage in a radius around the target. It's also a finisher skill, which means that it can release Tiger Strike for bonus physical damage. I've said before that Tiger Strike doesn't actually work with elemental damage, but because of how Dragon Tail is worded, there is an interesting interaction between these two skills. A very interesting one. In simplified terms, the way damage multipliers works in Diablo 2 is as follows. First you have your base damage, which usually is mainly your weapons damage. Let's say that our base damage is 10, just for the sake of easy math. Then a fully charged level 13 Tiger Strike adds 1020% enhanced damage on top. And then when you release with a normal attack, it would deal 112 total physical damage. Now let's pretend that we have a friend with us in the game that plays the paladin with a level 1 might aura that gives plus 40% enhanced damage. This bonus damage would stack on top of the already huge damage bonus from Tiger Strike and only increase the total damage output by 4. And this is the case for almost all damage bonuses in the game. For ARPG and or math nerds, most damage multipliers in Diablo 2 outside of your weapon are additive with each other. But here's where Dragontail is so interesting for this run. Let's say we have the same base case from before, but now we finish with Dragontail instead of a normal attack. This skill does not add flat elemental damage, but rather plus 50% fire damage. It's not very clear what that means from the in-game description, so let me explain. First we would calculate the physical damage like we did before, but then Dragontail adds plus 50% as additional fire damage on top of that, in one hit. This is a big deal and the whole reason why I picked the assassin for this challenge, a very big damage multiplier in Tiger Strike, and then one additional multiplicative damage bonus from Dragontail. After skilling into my first kick, I made sure to get the highest tier of boots available to me, Gambling Light-Plated boots, because the base damage of kicks is determined by the damage stat on your boots rather than your weapon. It's also heavily dependent on your strength and your dexterity, but I didn't know that yet, so I'll talk more about that later. The rest of my gear outside of my weapons and my boots were random junk cobbled together to fill my gear slots, but as a final bit of preparation for Andariel, I made the stealth rune word in a body armor. And then I approached Andariel. My palms were sweaty, knees weak, arms were heavy. I only had one shot and I was not gonna miss my chance to blow. Charging up Tiger Strike fully on random minions, I went in for the kill. Unfortunately, she did not fall to my kick, but that was a good chunk of her life gone in a single attack. I didn't check my character's screen damage before the fight on purpose to make it more suspenseful, but before resetting the game I took stock of the situation. 467 to 718 damage. Not too shabby at all, and with a lot of that being fire damage against Andariel's fire weakness, it felt very close. Close, but not enough. A setback for sure, but this was far from over. I already had a few ideas to improve my damage, but most of them would require even more level grinding, and my experience gain was already very slow, being level 18 in the first act. After resetting the game, I was running around in a previous area looking for a combat shrine for a temporary damage boost, but instead I found another one that I had not really considered yet, but that would become a core part for this challenge, the skill shrine. Skill shrines temporarily increase all of your skill levels by 2, significantly increasing my damage by boosting both Tiger Strike's and Dragontail's damage modifiers. I decided to try if maybe this boost was enough on its own. I went back to Andariel, opened the town portal, ran back to grab the skill shrine, and then quickly back to the catacombs again through the portal. I once again dialed up Tiger Strike to 3 and... this time I was successful. All of Act 1, including Andariel, taken down in one hit. Wow, this was a great feeling. My character screen showed me a maximum hit damage of an even 1000. That's less than Andariel's 1024 life, so what got me there in the end was her weakness to fire damage. I was super happy, I celebrated with my live chat, the doubters couldn't believe their eyes, things were awesome. But, as cool as this was, Andariel was by far the easiest boss. 1024 damage is a lot for sure, but as soon as I lifted my gaze and looked ahead, I was in for a rude awakening. Duriel, the boss of Act 2, has almost 4 times the amount of life, and he does not share Andariel's weakness to fire. In fact, he resists fire damage by 20%. Dealing 1000 damage in one hit in the first act of the game was a major achievement, but if I wanted to make it through this challenge, I would have to increase my damage several times over before the next boss. Luckily, I had a couple of ideas in mind, and perhaps even luckier, I learned something new in Act 2 that would unlock a completely new angle for increasing my damage. Act 2 was no problem whatsoever. If I could one-shot Andariel, it shouldn't come as a surprise that I was able to one-shot random skeletons and beetles. Well, except Radamant. It turns out that this big mummy is even tankier than Andariel, so I had to skip him for the time being and come back later. But other than that, questing through the desert was smooth sailing. My plan for Duriel was twofold. I needed more levels and I wanted to make a new weapon to use with Dragontail. Grinding for levels was fairly straightforward, especially now that I had some area damage from Dragontail's explosion, but it was a bit tedious to one-shot everything over and over, so in the middle of Act 2 I made the decision to slightly change the rules of the challenge. I still had to one-shot every enemy, but once I had cleared an area with one-shots, I did allow myself to repeat the area without requiring me to one-shot everything. My reasoning was that I had already proven that I could one-shot everything in the area, but having more relaxed rules for repeat farming made the grind for levels faster and more chill. And there was going to be a lot of grinding in this challenge. Then for a weapon upgrade, I bought a staff with 2 sockets from Akara and put a Tear and a Rail rune into the staff to make the Leaf runeward. Designed for a fire sorceress, but there was one stat on this that made it very good for me. +3 to fire skills. And as it happens, the game considers Dragontail to be a fire skill. And with this stuff equipped, my Dragontail was boosted by 3 additional levels, a pretty significant increase. I reached the end of the act with few issues, and I was ready to start solving the problem of one-shotting the second act boss. As I mentioned earlier, I would need to deal 4000 damage to one-shot Duriel. And actually, my damage would have to be a fair bit more than that due to his fire resistance. Just to see what I was working with, I decided to give it a go as soon as I reached him, fully knowing that I was missing over half of the damage necessary, with my character screen displaying only 1361 max damage, and of course that was not enough for a one-shot. Even with my new weapon, I had to multiply my damage by more than 3 times. Now, you might ask, isn't the base damage of the staff going to be terrible? And yes, you are right, but I was not using this to charge up Tiger Strike, only to release the final blow with Dragontail. And that leads me to my next talking point, the weird mechanics of kicks. The basics are still the same, but here's the thing, when you use a kick, your weapon's damage isn't considered at all, not the base damage or the enhanced damage on the weapon itself. The base damage of your kicks comes from your boots rather than your weapon, but towards the end of Act 2 I learned that there was more to this calculation than I thought. Someone in my live chat had told me several times that strength and dexterity increases your base damage for kicks. I did not believe them at first because I had never heard of this before, and for weapon-based attacks it doesn't work like that at all. Stats only acts as a damage modifier similar to Tiger Strike, but the chatter's persistence made me do a bit of research between streams, and after scouring through 20-year-old forum posts on Diablo 2 game mechanics, I discovered something that would change the entire challenge for the better. The base damage of a kick does come from your boots listed kick damage, but also from your strength and dexterity stats, and the increase was pretty significant too. Just take a look at this test character with no gear and a level 1 Dragontail on kick. Just 10 additional stat points into strength increases the damage of a barefoot level 1 kick from 5 to 6 to 7 to 10. And when we're dealing with such big damage multipliers like Tiger Strike and Dragontail, that adds up quickly. I now had 3 separate levers to pull on to improve my damage. I could improve my base damage by finding better boots and by increasing my strength, also my dexterity, but I would favor strength because of my next point. I could increase my damage multiplier, mainly through a higher level of Tiger Strike, but each point into strength also adds a 1.2% damage modifier for kicks, which, while very small compared to the 1000% plus ED of Tiger Strike, would add up to a significant amount if I was all-out strength maxing. And finally, increasing the level of Dragontail. Good news for my one-shotting endeavors, but this unfortunately meant that my current character build was awful. Not only having wasted a few skill points to get some utility skills, but I had also spent a lot of stat points into vitality, and I really needed as many stat points as possible to be in strength to maximize my damage. So I would have to respic to take Duriel down, but before that I did some more farming, because respicking all of my vitality into strength would turn me into a very fragile glass cannon. I farmed the Canyon of the Magi and the False Tombs for experience, a lot of experience. I finally went back and one-shot Radamant for the Book of Skill for 1 free skill point. And then I gambled a few Greaves, the highest kick damage boots available at the time. My damage was now 1.5k to 2.5k without a skill shrine, a big improvement, but still not nearly enough. So then I finally did the respec and went all out damage, putting every single stat point into strength and then all skill points into Dragontail and Tiger Strike. And this change alone massively increased my damage, now showing 2261 to 3371. A very noticeable increase, but still not enough. And by the way, that life pool was not looking so hot. I turned into a glass cannon indeed. Though I was still not testing with a skill shrine on, and when I finally did, I was surprised by the results. The exact same setup, but the +2 skills from a skill shrine put my damage at over 4000 max. It seemed like I was underestimating the power of extra skills, but it makes sense because it boosted both my Tiger Strike and my Dragontail. Now this was actually not quite enough yet, even if I would happen to hit an absolute max roll on my damage because of Duriel's 20 fire resistance. But all of a sudden I was very close. I kept farming the False Tombs until I hit level 27, and let me tell you, grinding to level 27 in Act 2 was a pain. But with each level up bringing more strength and more skill points, every level was a big increase in damage. Another reason that I targeted level 27 was that I had another cunning loot idea. In Diablo 2 you can transmute 3 magic amulets in the Heraldric Cube to make a random magic ring, or 3 magic rings to make an amulet. and from character level 27 and onward, amulets created this way has a chance of rolling +1 to individual skill trees, and seeing how powerful +2 skills were, this could really make a difference. It was a long shot though, since getting specifically +1 to martial arts for the assassin was going to be very rare, but I explored every option to improve my damage that I could think of. I had even saved a bunch of magic rings that I had found in anticipation of hitting 27. I did actually end up rolling a +1 amulet, and it was for the assassin too, but it was for the wrong skill tree. So close, but yet so far. And from this point forward, I cubed every magic ring I found into amulets, hoping for that +1 to martial arts. With some more stats, a few extra skill points, and then of course a skill shrine, I was ready for another attempt. And I got so close to one-shotting Duriel. I would have liked to improve my damage more, to increase my chance of success, but grinding in Act 2 was super tedious by now, and Act 3 would open up some good item farming options, so in the end I decided to try and get lucky with the damage roll instead of preparing more. Before going again, I did get a slight damage boost by farming one perfect amethyst from gem shrines, and put that in a breastplate which I used over stealth when attempting one-shots. After doing a few attempts, I had been streaming for 4 hours in that session already, and I was running out of time. I only had time for one more attempt, and then this happened. With a skill shrine on and Tiger Strike charged, I put on my new armor and boosted my damage to over 5100 max, and this time I one-shot Duriel. A primeval with 4000 life and 20 fire resist, defeated in a single hit by a level 27 character. And the funny thing was that despite the insane scaling of boss HP, I was actually getting more optimistic the further into the challenge I got. So when I moved on to Act 3, I did so with confidence, but there was a lot of work to be done. The next Act boss, Mephisto, had 50% more life than Duriel, sitting at around 6000, but also 33% fire resistance, and resisting 1/3 of my fire damage meant that I had to get the number of my character screen up that much higher than the 6k life target. So, to recap the current situation, as we just saw, my damage at level 27 maxed out at a little over 5100, while most of my gear now did something to improve my damage, even if it was just a couple of stat points. My jewelry was still very mediocre, my rings didn't provide any damage at all, and my amulet only had 2 stats in total, and the amulet slot in particular had so much more potential. My plan for Act 3 was to do some farming for more levels, score a new pair of boots, get some better gems in my helm and my armor, and hopefully find some better jewelry and some charms. I guess I haven't talked much about my charms yet, but they were mostly minor bonuses to strength and dexterity for now, with a few elemental damage charms as filler. And to be honest, a few +2 life charms, because even though my damage was great, questing with just barely over 100 life on a melee character was pretty scary. So, with my next goal set for Mephisto, it was time to power up again, and ignore that goofy guy in the corner. It's me. Hi. I forgot to record the game separately for several streams after this point, so I had to resort to using stream footage for the video. I'll mute myself, but I will sit there and hang out for a while. One-shotting my way through the questline of the act was no problem, apart from that low life I mentioned earlier. I made sure to fight lots of monsters because I wanted to be at least level 30 for a very specific reason. I found another gem shrine for another perfect amethyst while looking for a skill shrine, and put it in my armor for another +10 to strength, and when I reached Mephisto I gave him a try right away, but with very low hopes of success. Good damage, but not at all enough. But then again, I hadn't achieved any major upgrades yet. I ran lower Kurast for a while for some item upgrades. There are a lot of chests, breakable urns and lootable terrain here, including something referred to as super chests. Special chests that have a chance to drop a lot of items at once. My hopes were that this was going to be a good source of jewelry, charms, gems and runes, exactly what I needed to upgrade my gear. And now I was starting to see grand charms with up to 5 strength, which was a full level up worth of stats. Nice. I gambled gloves in hopes of getting +1 to martial arts skills for the assassin. I didn't get what I wanted this time, only skills for the Amazon skill trees, and then a circlet with +1 to all paladin skills. So no improvements, but just to show you that gambling certain items had a lot of potential. After a bunch of experience and loot farming, I reached my level goal. In fact, I grinded all the way to level 31, overshooting my goal by a full level. And here's an overview of my gear at the time. All of my gear slots were now contributing to my damage in some way, either via +2 skills, +2 stats, or just raw damage in the case of the boots. Even my +2 stats charm collection was coming along nicely. I gave Mephisto another try, and this time I got pretty close, down to less than 10% life, though given my listed damage that was probably a really high damage roll, and considering Mephisto's resistances I wasn't actually confident that I could one-shot him now, even with a max damage roll. But that was really promising, and I still had lots of room for improvements to be made to my gear, and the biggest difference maker by far would be to get some better boots. Greaves are the highest damage boots out of the normal quality ones, which is typically what you'll find in normal difficulty. To find any higher damage boots, I would need to get my hands on a pair of exceptional boots, and the only way to get that right now was upgrading a pair in the Horodic Cube, and for that I would need a pair of rare boots, a perfect amethyst, a rel rune and a thal rune. I had a couple of rel runes saved up in my stash already. I got a lucky thal rune drop from the Council in Travancore, and then I farmed gem shrines to upgrade another perfect amethyst. I realized by now that I was going to do a lot of gambling for potential upgrades in this challenge, so I decided to use an end rune that I found earlier to make edge in a crossbow. Not for fighting, but to threaten vendors to sell me their wares for cheaper. This rune word reduces all vendor prices by 15%, including prices for gambling. Then I gambled for greaves until I got a decent pair of rares. I had some rare ones already, but with the gold to spare I felt I should get some better ones before upgrading. And these were quite nice, a little bit of run speed and some resistances. And putting all of that together in the cube, I could create these ones. Rare war boots with 39 to 80 kick damage, a major increase over the greaves 10 to 20 kick damage. An extra 30 to 60 damage doesn't sound like a lot, but when adding my big damage multipliers on top, the difference was pretty huge. The only reason I hadn't done this already is that war boots have a base level requirement of 25, and when you upgrade an item in the cube it adds 5 levels to the requirement, so level 30 was actually the lowest possible requirement for a pair of war boots created this way. I went back to Mephisto for another attempt, using the well-rehearsed tactic of opening a TP next to the boss and then going to grab a skill shrine and charge up. I would like to hype this up and say that it was a nail-biter, but with the new boots and a skill shrine it wasn't even close. 7.7 thousand to 13,000 damage. Even with Mephisto's resistances I would have to get extremely unlucky to not one-shot him with this kind of damage. 13k max damage, that's a lot of damage. I was personally as surprised as I was impressed, and to be honest, this gave me an ever so slight case of hubris. I even stuck around and farmed Mephisto for a while for items after the initial kill, since it was so easy to one-shot. I didn't even really need the skill shrine to do so consistently. But here's the thing, Mephisto only had 50% more life compared to Duriel, and going into the last 2 acts of the game, the bosses start scaling very aggressively, with Diablo's life more than doubling compared to Mephisto's and then Bale doubling it again. Starting out in Act 4, I retired my Poison Trident and I used my Malice Axe for charging up Tiger Strike instead. As I mentioned earlier, Open Wound scales with your character's level, and if my calculations are correct, it was now dealing over 500 total physical damage over 8 seconds at level 31. A lot more than the 225 poison damage from the spear, and more than enough to take down any random trash mob with Tiger Strike. And actually, now Dragontail was getting so strong that I didn't even really need to charge up anymore, except against the strongest enemies. And speaking of the strongest enemies, the 2 major problems left to solve were Diablo with just under 14k life and 33 fire resist, and then later Bale with an astonishing 26.5k life and also 33% fire resist. As well as a few tricky super unique monsters along the way, like the very tanky Isuel and the troublesome trio, the Ancients. Ever since I reached level 27, I had kept on rolling amulets with every single magic ring I had found, and in Act 4 I finally got rewarded. Shugokusha's amulet, +1 to all martial arts skills, and at this point every extra skill point was a big deal. But now here's something that was an even bigger deal. Creating a pair of war boots in Act 3 was the key to one-shotting Mephisto, and in Act 4 I had another trick up my sleeve for a similar power spike. Without getting too technical, in Act 4 the vendors offered to sell me gear of significantly higher item level than in Act 3, and this unlocked a very specific item to be purchased. By running in and out of time to refresh Jamella's inventory, I was able to buy this, Grim Wand of Lower Resistance, with 67 charges of the very powerful Necromancer curse, Lower Resist. At level 1, this curse reduces enemy elemental resistances by -31 for a short duration, and with Diablo having 33 fire resist, this would remove almost all of his resistance to my main attacks. The wand had a level requirement of 36, which is a really high level for Act 4, but this wand was certainly worth the effort. So unsurprisingly, Act 4 had its fair share of experience grinding as well. When I first encountered Isuel in the wild, I tried attacking him to see how far off I was, because I was certain that I wasn't strong enough yet, and I was only able to deal about 50% of the required damage to him, even though I did have a skill shrine active. I did the Hellforge quest hoping for another Thal or Amn rune. Actually, I remember hoping for a Soul rune the most, but that can't actually drop from the Hellforge in normal. though it can drop from normal enemies in Act 4, although it's pretty rare. I only got a lowly Nephrune from the Hellforge as well as a normal quality Amethyst, so the Hellforge didn't really help me all that much. I was still gambling leather gloves with all the gold that I acquired. The game kept taunting me with Amazon Plus to skill gloves, but eventually it paid off. Shugokusha's leather gloves for another +1 to martial arts skills. Then I spent a lot of time in the River of Flame before even attempting Diablo. My main goal was to get to level 36 for the wand, but I did also end up finding that soul rune that I wanted, and I used it to make the runeword lore for one additional +1 to all skills. Several repeats of the River of Flame later, I did get to 36, and with 5 additional levels as well as 3 more skill points from my gear, I was ready to give the Chaos Sanctuary and Diablo a try. But first I wanted to give Isual another go, because the quest reward for killing him was yet another 2 skill points, and this time I took the Fallen Angel as well as all minions around him down in one explosive kick. So how much damage was that kick? Well, it turned out to be 12 to 19k. Alright, pretty good. And with the 2 additional skill points from defeating Isual, my odds for defeating Diablo were looking decent. But the Chaos Sanctuary is a dangerous place, and with my small life pool I took a lot of damage from enemies in the brief window before one-shotting them, so I had to advance carefully. And in the Chaos Sanctuary I also encountered a problem which I had not really faced before, a completely fire immune enemy. The Vizier of Chaos wasn't the first fire immune enemy that I had seen with this character, but it was the first mandatory one. I tried cursing the ghost with lower resist, but that did not break his immunity to fire, so I had to just hope that the physical damage portion of my attack was enough, and luckily it was. I don't know how much life the Vizier of Chaos has, but thinking about it, even though Dragontail was mostly fire damage, the physical portion of it was still a few thousand. The rest of the Seal Guardians were no problem to one-shot, and then I was ready for Diablo, and I was pretty confident in taking him down. I did the usual routine for boss kills, skill shrine, charge up on weak enemies, and this time I had my lower resist one prepared on my weapon switch. I went in for the kill, but I didn't get it, and in fact, Diablo got me instead. This fight was like a rock-throwing duel between 2 windows. It was going to end quickly either way, and this time Diablo stood victorious. But to look at the bright side, I got really close. Now every attempt would require me to clear all of the Chaos Sanctuary again. But since I had already exhausted most of my potential upgrades from Act 4 already, I decided to just run it back and roll the dice again. And this time, I stood victorious. Diablo himself defeated in a single hit. Honestly, if I was Diablo, I would feel a bit embarrassed right now. My damage had been scaling like crazy lately, and honestly, it felt like I wasn't that far off from reaching the 26,000 required for Bale. But a new problem was starting to arise from the shadow of my success. So far there had been lots of ways to improve my gear, and every level brought new skill points and stats. And leveling up even higher was definitely easier now that I reached Act 5. But once I reached level 40, I had maxed out both Tiger Strike and Dragon Tail. Neither of those skills have any damage synergies, so apart from getting more plus to skill scare, this was as good as they were going to get. There were still a few ways to eke out slightly more damage from my skill points by stacking some other martial arts charges on top or putting points into Venom for a bit of poison damage. But again, elemental skills are not boosted by Tiger Strike or Dragon Tail, and adding a couple of hundred elemental damage from something like Phoenix Strike was just not going to make a difference. And speaking of gear, all my gear slots were now looking pretty stacked. Not perfect items of course, and there were certainly still possible upgrades to get, but getting gear upgrades was going to be a lot more difficult now. Testing my damage out, my character screen showed me 15k to 24k, absolutely huge numbers, and I was already just a few thousand away from reaching Bale's life total with the top end of my damage range. But getting that last bit of damage needed was going to be a lot harder than before. Though having gotten this far, I was very determined to make it happen, and my plan to get there was with more levels, because each level still meant 5 additional strength, 1 more rune word, and more degenerate gambling for very specific stats. And of course, finally putting the 3rd amethyst in my body armor. This really should have been taken care of a long time ago, to be honest. I did a bunch of Eldritch and Shank farming for experience, but also for gold to fuel my gambling. I cubed 3 Thal runes into an Amn and secured all the runes needed for the Spirit rune word. But here's the thing, you can actually not find a sword with 4 sockets in normal. There is a hard cap of 3 sockets on items that drop in the first difficulty. The only way for me to get a 4-socketed sword was to either socket a sword with Larsuk's one-time quest reward, which would have been the reasonable thing to do to be honest, or I could use the cube to try and roll a random amount of sockets, with a 50-50 chance of getting the 4 sockets I needed. Another problem with the cube plan was that it also required me to use the Am rune for the rune word and the perfect amethyst that I was missing from my armor, but I did it anyway. Luckily, I am one lucky goblin. Looking at this footage while editing the video, I am shaking my head at the extreme greed in using the Amrund and the perfect amethyst for a 50-50 chance of getting the 4-socketed sword. But, you know, it worked out this time, I guess. I recouped the perfect amethyst by farming gem shrines, and while Amrunds are kind of rare to find in normal, I was doing so much repeat farming that I was counting on finding one more before I was ready for the ancients. And in one of the icy caves, I did. The Spirit Sword is a great caster weapon, but the only thing I was interested in was the +2 to skills. I already had +3 to fire skills from my leaf staff for kicking, but the Spirit Sword would give me +2 to Tiger Strike when charging up on weak enemies before an important one-shot. And I'm gonna be completely honest, the +22 to Vitality was really nice to have when moving around. I bought a random shield with some resistances to go with my sword, though honestly I mostly bought it because it matched my beautiful purple armor. And then I decided to take on one of the 2 remaining major obstacles, the Ancients. I was level 42 when I entered the area at Summit and pushed my strength to a total of 275. I was wearing the Spirit Sword, Lore Helm, the breastplate, still with only 2 perfect amethysts despite having a spare one. Don't ask me why, because I don't know. Martial Arts Amulet, random shield in hot purple color, martial arts gloves, 5 dexterity ring, 9 strength belt, a 4 dex ring and my rare war boots. Then every single strength and dexterity charm I had found and some filler to max out the inventory, and of course the leaf staff on Switch. So as you can see, upgrading my gear from this was going to be tricky. You can find belts with like 20 strength in Diablo 2, but not until much later in the game. Rings can spawn with +2 martial arts like amulets can, though I could have better stats on them for sure. And things like upgrading for +1 skills on the gloves to +2 would require a good amount of luck. Now about those Ancients, on paper they should be easy judging by their life total, but this fight had 2 unique challenges. First, 2 of them have a very high physical resistance, something I hadn't really encountered yet, and the fire damage from Dragon Tail is actually based off the physical damage you would actually deal to a target, not your theoretical physical damage on the character screen, so resisting 70% of physical damage would reduce my total damage output by a lot. And more importantly, there were obviously 3 of them, and you can't leave the summit after the fight has started without resetting the entire encounter, and I was doubtful that I could take them down with anything less than a fully charged kick. So for this fight I would have to try and get them close together, curse them with low resist, and then deliver a kick that hits all 3 of them. And to maximize my damage I had to exploit a difference in their stats, and specifically target Madak, as he's the only ancient without physical resistance. And I had to do all of this including my usual routine for one-shotting before my Tiger Strike charges ran out. Skill Shrine acquired. Tiger Strike charged up on weak enemies with Spirit Sword. On my way back to my area at Summit TP, swapped the sword for the wand, hit the altar to spawn the barbarians, quickly cursed them all, and then tried to get them to come in for a group hug. But then long before I actually got a kickoff, my Tiger Strike charges ran out, and with an unboosted Dragon Tail I didn't come close to one-shotting them. Now I did get stuck on the terrain for a little bit during this attempt, but I did not have a lot of time to execute my entire plan. And if you look closely, I was not even kicking with the leaf staff out, I forgot to hit my weapon switch in the chaos. Now I do some crazy things in Diablo 2 and I have a lot of knowledge about the game, but mechanical execution is not one of my strengths. Here's the second attempt. Start the fight, curse them, and wait for an opening. Being more mindful about the timer, I took the first chance that looked decent. And I got it. That might have looked a little weird, so let me explain. Talik uses the barbarian skill Whirlwind, and one of the quirks with that skill is that you can actually not die mid-animation. If their life reaches 0, the barbarian will keep spinning to the location where the skill was targeted and then die. 1 hit, 1 kill? What about 1 hit, 3 kills? I moved on through the Wolfstone Keep, eager to give the final boss a go. And before I reached the Throne of Destruction, I finally filled my body armor out with perfect amethysts. This was long overdue. And taking stock of the situation, my displayed damage was now 17 to 27k. My max damage was now in theoretical one-shot range. But with lower resist not quite removing all fire resistance, just almost, I don't believe that even an absolute max hit was quite enough yet, but I was definitely very close. The first wave of Bale's minions featured another fire immune elite, but once again I was banking on the physical portion of my kick being enough on its own, but I didn't even get close. Though if we rewind, we'll see that my Tiger Strike once again ran out before I could deliver the kick. A bummer to have to start the Worldstone Keep over, but seeing 50% damage with no charges made me confident that a charged up version would be more than enough, and it was. Then the rest of Bale's minions, with no fire immunity in sight, was a piece of cake. though I did go back to Act 1 between the waves to charge up my Tiger Strike to ensure that I had maximum damage for each elite. And then finally, here I was, one single enemy left in the game to one-shot, Bale. By far the single most tanky enemy in the game, but this was it. One more boss stood between me and victory. I had put close to 30 hours into this character by now, hours spent grinding, theory crafting and one-shot attempts, and it all led up to this moment. I did the by now very familiar setup with a skill shrine and charging up in Act 1, and now I also had a low level Venom for a slight damage boost. Swap to my curse wand and run in, but then Bale set a trap for me. He had covered my town portal in tentacles. I had to kick them to get out of the trap, but then of course the attempt was over because my attacks were no longer fully charged. The next attempt was an absolute mess. I got in, cursed Bale, delivered a kick on time that took out over 90% of his life. But then I'm not sure what happened because I kept kicking Bale and accidentally killed him. Whoops. I guess I got a little bit flustered by the high stakes of being so close to finishing the challenge, but that was clearly not a one-shot. I exited the game, turned off terror zones to not give myself any advantages I shouldn't have and pretended like it never happened. So I had gotten a taste of the final fight, but as I mentioned earlier, with a little bit of fire resistance left over after lower resist and 26.5k life versus my 27k max damage, I'm not sure if there was a theoretical possibility of a one-shot yet. And if there was, it would require extreme luck. And as each attempt required me to go through the Worldstone Keep and clear the 5 waves of minions, I figured I might as well try to prepare a little bit more instead of going for more attempts over and over. I decided to go after Nilatak since the experience is quite good both from him and the minions on the way to get there, and he's also quite high level so the loot potential was nice too. On one farming round I found this, a magical circlet with +3 to cold skills for the sorceress. Not useful to me, but better helms than my lore were certainly possible, although very rare. After farming 3 more levels at Nilatak, up to level 46, I decided to try my luck at upgrading my gloves from +1 martial arts to +2. The amount of gambling for randomly generated items while looking for one specific stat that I've done in this challenge might seem crazy, but if you don't play the lottery, you can't win the jackpot. Not financial advice, by the way. And I did have so much gold from the experience grind that I couldn't really do much else with. First, I got a rare pair with +1 martial arts along with +5 dexterity, an upgrade after just a couple of 100k gold. These were good, but I kept going. A pair of sick rares with dual leech and dual resistances. Any other challenge run character would have been absolutely thrilled with gloves like these, but I was not interested in defensive stats at all this time. And then 800,000 gold after starting the gambling spree. There they were, a beautiful pair of +2 to martial arts gloves. With a +3 to cold skill circlet fresh in memory and a bit of gold to spare, I decided to gamble some circlets with the rest of my money. I didn't get any +3 or even +2, but this rare with +1 to all assassin skills and 11 strength. And to be honest, movement speed and life was nice to have on this glass cannon too. This also meant that in the end I was rewarded for being greedy and socketing my spirit sword with the cube earlier, because now I had my Larsuk socket left. And with a hole in the circlet for another perfect amethyst, I had secured not only a glove upgrade but also a powerful, very stylish helm upgrade. More powerful than ever before, I returned to the Lord of Destruction. Once again I did not check my damage numbers before doing this attempt to add a little bit of extra suspense for the livestream. So I actually didn't know how big of a deal those last 2 upgrades were, but my gut told me they would be noticeable. One final skill shrine, charging up on Fallen for the last time, swapping to my wand. The curse landed, and I went in for the kill. And there we have it, Diablo 2 beaten with only one-shots. If you had told me I would be able to one-shot Bale when I started this challenge, I'm not sure I would have believed you. After the kill I hurried back to Act 1 before the skill shrine ran out to see what my final damage ended up being. Level 46, 330 strength, 19 to 31,000 damage, without leaving normal difficulty. Alright, I'm pretty pleased with that. Thanks again to War Thunder for sponsoring this video. Check it out for free on PC, consoles or mobile. And don't forget to use my links in the video description or the pinned comment to grab your free bonus pack, including premium vehicles, in-game currency and more. Available for new and returning players who haven't played the game in the last 6 months on PC and consoles. Thanks for watching. This ended up being one of my favorite challenges that I have done for the channel. A big shout out to Geed, Jamela and Anya for providing some crucial gear for this challenge, and an even bigger shout out to all my supporters on YouTube and Twitch. You are the Tiger Strike to my Dragon Tail.